is that there's very little that we understand. There's very little that we understand. There's very little that we understand. We see righteous people suffering. We find people who are wicked and evil, doing evil things, prospering, and we can't make sense of it. We have faith, we have principles. God is good, and if we see something that's not good, it means that we don't understand it, and all sorts of space in between. But this kind of theology, I think, is helpful in periods of crisis. And the author of the Mishnah is absolutely addressing a time of transition and a time of, I don't know why I'm still wearing a tie. I tried to get this thing off by earlier in the day. But anyways, I feel constricted by the universe as well. So in times of difficulty, I'll try to say this differently. I think we all experience less of a theological conflict, less of a question about God when things are going well, because we don't need to understand it if things are going well. If things are going well, like, we don't want to rock the boat. You know what? Don't ask too many questions. Don't even give it a second thought. Be grateful and move on. When things are difficult, so we want to understand in part we want to understand so that we can change it. Like, why is this happening? If I can figure out why it's happening, let me do something differently to try to influence a different outcome. The reality is that there's a lot that's beyond our control. That's the reality, right? Nobody wants that there should be any suffering in the world. Nobody wants that anyone should be going without food. So we have to ask ourselves why, if there's enough food, right? Oh, that's a different question. But so when things are difficult, whether it's for the individual, whether it's for the community, whether it's for the nation, people, one of the big shifts that in academic circles, people were making observations about at the beginning of this pandemic. And the truth is, people were writing about it before it actually happened, which is why it's really interesting, because we don't have prophets today, is the shift in seeing global calamities, whether it's a tsunami or, if God forbid, it's a terrorist attack or something, as being a failure of human intervention, protection, science, development, technology, etc., as opposed to divine retribution. Divine retribution is never something that we want to think about, because I don't want God to be upset with me. I don't want to get punished by God. Nobody does. And to think about God as a punisher is not a modality that we like to kind of embrace, right? God is the wrathful, vengeful, throw out, all of your anger and that's not a God that we want to relate to, because we want a loving and compassionate, and that's the God that we know. However, historically, within Jewish tradition in the 1400s and even 100 years ago, whenever there was something that was global, that it wasn't like I stubbed my toe, but like there's a pandemic, there's a drought, there's like a negative reality that's affecting many people, the default always was, somehow we're deficient, God is sending us a message to correct our behavior, let's have some introspection to try to think about what we've done wrong, to then be able to fix it, so then God will send the rain, God will send the technology, God will send. So people were already writing that by the next major thing, there's going to be how come scientists weren't ahead of this? How come the government couldn't prevent this? Why didn't technology track it? Why couldn't we nip it in the bud? All of those things. But God's not part of the conversation. And the truth is, I think in most spaces, the question of why is God doing to us, why is God allowing this to happen, however we phrase it, is not a question that is necessarily generative. And it's not a question that most people are asking. Because how could you possibly answer the question? Meaning it's helpful to ask questions to get you to think about it, because maybe you could come closer to the answer. We have no idea. We have no idea why anything happens. Why is this construction and all there is to show for it as a hole? There's been a hole outside of this window for months, and every day there's noise. And there's a hole. I'm telling you, I want to go there and ask, how much noise does it take not to build something? Anyways, so there's a lot that I don't understand, but I realize that these things cost money. People, clearly there's something constructive going on, even though it looks just like it's just one massive destructive act. So, the thought process is helpful in trying to take responsibility for things that we're not doing well, because if we're not doing them well, even if we're not getting punished for them or we're getting called out for them, we should try to be better at all the things that we're doing. So the question to ask, how should I act? How should I behave under greater scrutiny is always a good question. It's a good day, it's a bad day, it doesn't make a difference. A person should always try to be sensitive to the way in which they are existing in the universe. So in thinking about why is this happening the way that it's happening? Yes, So I will post the Mishnah. In fact, and we're gonna see it here in a second. That in general, when a person is thinking about why is something happening, it's important to recognize that although we might not ever know the answer, the thought process itself is a healthy response. Meaning, if something bad happens, God forbid, and a person says, "Okay, look, it's the whole world is ownerless. Everything is coincidental. There is no cause and effect. My actions don't mean anything." So then that's not a way to live. If you or to think if you want to be impactful, because if nothing makes a difference, then all you have is apathy. So the idea that we can change things is very much a Jewish idea. Okay, so let's take a look at the Mishnah and hear what happens. Rabbi Yanai Oymar. So the first part of this Mishnah is clearly a response to the end of the previous Mishnah. The end of the previous Mishnah says, "Don't lean upon your own understanding." Right? Okay, so if we shouldn't lean on our own understanding, maybe we should rely on the understanding of others, right? I understand I'm deficient. I see things through my smudgy glasses, but maybe somebody else has a different perspective. So Rabbi Yanai says, "Ein biyadenu," in the plural, in the collective. It is not within our hands. Lo mishalvas harishayim. We're going to unpack these words. Shalva is a powerful word. It means almost like tranquility. It's the word that's used in next week's parsha about Jacob before the sale of Joseph, and he's criticized for this. Jacob is criticized that he wants to live beshalva. He wants to live in tranquility. He had a hard life. He just wants to live out his days in peace and quiet. So here, the fact that Rishoyim, wicked people, they translate it as security, some sort of peacefulness, that you can have wicked people not being in jail, not being marginalized, not being held accountable, not being inspired to change, but just living off their life in peace and tranquility in their evilness. V'af lo miysurei tzadikim. And right, so not only can we not understand why good things are happening to bad people, we also have no idea how to understand the afflictions of righteous people. Okay, so you could understand maybe God wants to, pay back, wicked people in this world, so that in the next world there's nothing left. There's some sort of theology here that evidently, from the way in which the Mishnah is framed, it is more complicated to understand righteous people suffering than it is to have wicked people doing well. And I think that that's true. I was in the pediatric emergency room, and Rachmana litzlan last night, a kid came in. They look like they're going to be okay. Horrible burns on their arms. Let's say a kid, how can we part out of a world? How can we believe in a God that has children suffering? It's actually to the core of the human experience. When we see children who are so pure, who've done nothing wrong, that within Jewish tradition, they're not even held accountable for their actions because they don't have consent yet. Their brain hasn't developed to even hold them to be responsible to be punished. So they're completely innocent. Okay, so that's a complicated question. Why do righteous people, why are children suffering? Okay, so Rabbi Yanai says, we collectively, our hands, we can't explain it. Rav Masya continues, and this is probably was taught as separate Mishnayos. They're put here together, but they probably deserve being next to each other, but not in the same Mishnah. Rav Masya ben Chorash Oymar, having maktim b'sholim kol adam. That a person should be the first to say, how you doing? Good afternoon, good morning, good to see you, to each person. But have a zonov la'ara'is, that a person, it is better to be the tail, zonov, to the ari, to the lion, va'al tehi roish l'shu'olim, and not to be the head of foxes. So evidently there was some sort of non-Jewish axiom that said the opposite, and this, according to Hertz, this is in response to that Roman or early non-Jewish teaching that better to be the lower part of the tricky thing than being the head of the lion. I don't know what they meant. Here, what it means is when we think about, let's say being the captain of a sinking ship, or being a dishwasher in a ship that is buoyant, right? It doesn't make it the position is less important than you being on the right boat. So better to be kind of at the back end of the right group of people. You don't need to have a platform. You don't need to have a microphone. You don't need to have your name in the credits. Better to be associated with the right folks, even if it's kind of at the bottom of that barrel, than to be heading up with your name in big letters, right, in the wrong party. And all of this, let's just stop sharing for a second. All of this, both of these teachings are meant to kind of provide some sort of way of processing the challenging moments of their lives, right? That Jerusalem was no longer going to be the center of their Jewish identity. The temple was no longer going to be kind of the address of God. And whenever God is hidden, things are messed up, things are broken. When God is revealed, so then the divine presence, the clarity of the truth of God reigns. And so it's all good all the time. When God is hidden, so then we have this world where everything is hidden, the truth is hidden, everything is concealed, things are upside down. So part of the theological process is a recognition that once we can't see the truth, it's not on us to answer for it. Meaning we have a tradition of what's right and what's wrong. We have a moral compass. But you want to know, like in very specific strokes, why did this happen? How could there be a Holocaust? How could, right? That we don't, I'm sure we've said this over many times. The Kuzari says to know God would be to be God, right? In other words, if you have, the only way that you could have infinite knowledge of the universe is if you were the infinite source of the universe, and that can only be for God. So we have faith, right? Where the intellect ends, faith begins. But that doesn't mean that we're supposed to be obnoxious humans to each other because we don't know how to function. So this next teaching is saying, okay, so you don't know what to do, be nice to people. You're not going to lose by being nice to people. You know, what would happen in the world if everybody was like, you know what, the world's so broken. I know I mentioned a few weeks ago, a friend of mine growing up passed away as a young child. It's my age. It's all very upsetting. Anyways, there was just a memorial service for him this past Sunday. So I happened to have been driving somewhere to a different state to meet somebody social distantly. I was having an issue with stuff. Anyways, I was able to watch on the Zoom thing. Probably wasn't the safest thing, but while I was driving, I was watching this thing. Anyways, one of the people who was giving kind of a eulogy said, and this guy's got to be in his 70s now, the person who's speaking, and he says, listen, in my life, I've never met anyone that nobody had a bad word to say about them. Everybody, you can find somebody who has something nice to say about them. But to find somebody who nobody has ever said anything bad about, that's impossible. I say, yeah. So what would it be like if the response to the brokenness, to the hatred, to the division was that everybody would say about you that they're the person who's the first one to try to make peace. They're the first person. There's like an orchestra of noise, of sirens, and of drilling, and of, I don't know how much of it comes through, but I'm sorry. I was on a panel on Monday at Penn, and I'm speaking, and all of a sudden there's this massive drilling. What are you supposed to do? So when one of the ways in which we can respond to the things that we don't know, and I have an article about this that I wrote many years ago, Elijah the prophet, who's the one who was given the covenant of peace, the bris of shalom. When the Gemara doesn't know an answer to a question, it says teku. Teku is an abbreviation. Teku it's an abbreviation, it's an acronym for Tishbi Yitaritz Kushias V'Bayis. That Tishbi, the Tishba'ite, will come and answer all of our questions and inquiries. So who's the Tishbiite? So it's a guy from Tishbi, but it's Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishbi, right? It's Elijah the prophet, Elijah the person from Tishbi. So there's a deep message there that when we don't know something, the answer, we don't know what we're supposed to do, we don't know how to explain something, the default of the world is to respond to things which are different and that we don't know with hate and fear, right? That's Islamophobia, that's homophobia, that's transphobia, that's xenophobia. It's, I don't know, so it must be that it's bad. The Torah's perspective is, if we don't know, we fill it with love, we fill it with compassion, and we fill it with a covenant of peace. So there are things that we can't answer, and there's deep wisdom in being silent. When Aaron's sons die, the pasuk says, "Vayidam Aaron." Aaron was silent. Parents are not supposed to bury their children. It's unnatural. The Torah says that you can't even take the eggs away from a mother bird in her presence, because children are not supposed to be taken away when the parent is there, right? Even in the animal world, there's a biblical prohibition because there's a sensitivity that on a natural order, children are not supposed to leave this world before their parents. But we see, God forbid, it happens. So what's the response? Aaron is silent. When Aaron dies, tradition teaches us that the Jewish people mourned him more than they mourned Moses. Because a person lives a full life, there's what to say. There's what to reflect upon. There's what to acknowledge is absent. There's what to inspire other people to perpetuate and to go in that direction. But when we don't have anything to say, we're meant to be silent. And so trying to channel that need for a response out of the space where the response will by nature be deficient because it can't possibly answer. So I was in the hospital last night, that they don't turn the lights off and they're out of rooms. And so like there are beds and cots and hallways. And in this particular place in the hospital, they have like observers everywhere, right? There's tons of security because it's a hospital, and there's security for security reasons, and there's security for COVID reasons, and because of this part of the pediatric place, there's other security. So there's people everywhere. They're 6 feet apart, but they're everywhere, and the lights are on, and you have to have a mask, and there's not even a room. You're in a hallway, and so I'm sitting there, and I'm trying to learn. I brought Sfarim, and I can't anymore. Like I'm done. But I'm still there. So there's a wonderful app. It's called Torah Anytime, and they're videos. And I know many of the Rebbeim there. They're my Rebbeim in Yeshiva. And so I was listening to some of that. I was catching up on what I missed in the world. And I was actually listening to a eulogy that a Rebbe of mine gave for a different Rebbe of mine. And he said, the purpose of the eulogy is to, on some level, and this is one of the intentions of eulogy, is to kind of take an account of who the person was, to recall the essence of the person, and to acknowledge that that's no longer here. I think that part of what the Mishnah here is trying to grapple with is that when the temple was lost, and when Jewish unity was lost, and when the hierarchy of being able to answer the questions through prophecy, through the Kohen, through a mechanism of the Sanhedrin, you don't know what you're supposed to do, so then you can ask the people who have access to these higher planes of knowledge. So when that's lost, how do you respond? And I think there's something really beautiful here in making sure that you're the first person to say shalom. Okay, maybe you don't know all the questions on the SAT test. Maybe you don't know always, can you make a right on red here or not, right? There's always, right? There are things that humans, we stumble in, but there's no excuse, right, for not being nice to people. There's no excuse for not smiling at somebody, especially, before you know them. And I think there's something deep in this as well. It's to be nice to somebody who you love. It's not a chiddush. If you're not nice to somebody that you love, then you should speak to somebody, right? The novelty becomes when you can be nice to somebody when you have no idea who they are. Now, sometimes, to acknowledge, it's much easier to be nice to people you don't know than it is to be nice to some people you do know, and that's not on us, that's on them for the most part. But the idea that to embrace that which is unknown in meeting somebody for the first time, that the lenses that we see, the unknown, is the lenses of peace. Like that itself is calming. That itself, I think, is grounding. And the word shalom, as we've mentioned many times, is also the word for wholeness. Like it's shalem, it's complete. We can fill that void with whatever it is we're missing, whatever what we're lacking, with, I think, reinforcing in the belief that we have that God is a peaceful God. God is a good God. And in the world, when we are at some point in that place of being able to see it properly, we will be able to acknowledge in with clarity the goodness of all that which has happened. But we're not in that place right now. And so now we have to have faith, and we have to still be able to function. So anyways, opening it up for questions or thoughts. there's also just finally, there's something deeply honest and also profound in being able to say, I don't know. There's something like honest about it. I don't know. I don't know most things. And I'm sure we've said this. Yeah, Ben, go ahead.
I was going to say that you said earlier that when we say we don't know and we're doing this questioning, one thing that occurs to me is that it's more than just faith that we have. We are also told to affect change, that we have the ability to affect change. We were given choices, and we were given the ability to affect change. So when I think about how to affect change, I'm thinking about you demonstrate you go to a demonstration, you vote, you volunteer, you donate to charity, you pray. Those are other things we could do. The other thing that you've taught over the last 8 months that I've been teaching, sitting with you, the other thing you taught is, are you adding to the holiness or are you subtracting from the holiness? So there is so much more that explains, there's so much more that's important beyond the question of why is God doing this to us? It's not for us to question. The only question should be, what are you doing? Are you doing those things to affect change? And are you adding or subtracting from holiness?
Beautiful, and thank you. Yeah, and in fact, you reminded me, the Gemara says if a person is suffering, whether it's a minor suffering like, they ate too much cholent, or they're suffering because there was no cholent, right? Whatever that level of suffering is, a person is supposed to ask themselves, is there good that's expected of me that I haven't yet delivered on? And that's like the first question is like have I added, enough holiness? Like, have I exhausted my opportunities of giving holiness into the world? And so, yeah, I think that's very much, that is very much a response. Thank you. It's good to see you. Other thoughts or reflections? All right, well, it should be a schus for Tal ben Naomi, for Shalema, and thank you for being with me in the journey, and thank you for all of the inspiring thoughts, and for holding space for community. It's very supportive. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing everybody, God willing, tomorrow.
And may you continue to give light to the world today.
Thank you. Amen. Thank you, friends. So good to see everybody.